there's a lot we could talk about here in the beginning. I mean, there's like Kanye 2020. There, Elon Musk making booty shorts that cost $69.420.
I just don't even. I don't even get.
These
I don't
aren't
even get 'em.
bits anymore. These are just us talking about what's happening.
The real world is a strange place, maybe even stranger than we can handle. I don't understand why Kanye announcing that he was running for president was such big news, because he did the exact same thing like 4 years ago and then never like followed up on it, and now people are saying, they're like, oh, Kanye West still hasn't filed any paperwork for like his run. He tweeted something and then didn't follow up on it. Oh my god, like that is news. That is
Unlike Kanye.
very unlike Kanye.
Yeah, the timeline just kind of continues to divulge and split and twist into things we never really thought imaginable.
Many alternative universes.
We are in the darkest timeline.
Yeah.
Welcome to Strange Conversations, where rock and roll isn't dead, it's just experimenting with alternative tunings. I'm Austin Kenny.
And I'm Dylan Bennett.
Welcome to Classics 3.
The
This week,
trifecta.
in honor of that Goo anniversary and of Sonic Youth just always being a great band to tune into, we decided to pick them for this episode. They made it pretty far in the bracket that we did. I think they're in the final four, weren't they?
It was no, they weren't. They lost to My Bloody Valentine by like just a hair, which was very sad. Very sad to see.
Yeah, I think it may have even been like by one vote potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's there's some heartbreaking losses there, but hey, we can pick whatever we want. It's our podcast, so we picked these folk here, Sonic Youth, formed 1981 in the old Big Apple, New York City.
Yeah, a time I feel like a lot of people probably don't even realize. I feel like the state of New York City right now, and just the fact that it's maybe like the most expensive, that or LA, like
the oversaturation
I know.
of New York City.
I think people forget that like New York City from the 60s to really like the late 90s was a place that had just completely been stripped of all of its like funding and infrastructure and support, and so it was incredibly overrun with poverty and with drugs because of poverty. And so it was an incredibly cheap city to live in, and artists just flocked there. And that's basically how we got punk rock, was essentially all these freaks and loners and just general weirdos were hanging
Outcasts.
out. Yeah, we're hanging out at these music clubs. CBGB's probably being the most famous of them, but the Mud Club, the Kitchen, not the Kitchen, the Kitchen. Yeah, the Kitchen, the Max's Kansas City. And so by
Sonic Youth being a band that has played at all of those venues,
yeah.
and more.
Yeah. And so by the time you get to, 75, you've got forget the Velvet Underground. They've gone and passed by then, but you've got New York Dolls, you got the Ramones, you got Television, Talking Heads, Blondie, Patti Smith, and then by 78, UK just takes it and runs with it. But people forget that punk didn't really end when the Sex Pistols broke up. It just kind of kept morphing and getting weirder and changing. And New York City in the early 80s was an exceptionally interesting place to be in a punk band because that was really when a little movement known as no wave took hold in New York City, which the best way to get information on No Wave, I highly recommend anybody to check out the compilation No New York, which is just rife with cool facts. But probably the coolest fact of it is that it was put together by Brian Eno. It's a compilation of four New York bands, four new wave bands from New York. I believe it was released in 82, I want to say. But Sonic Youth isn't on it. They actually weren't really as well known when this compilation was put together. But it's got Mars. It has the Teenage Jerks, I believe. Jesus and the Teenage Jerks. It has the Contortions, and it has one other band that I think is like an acronym, and I'm forgetting the name of them. But it is weird. I like it is
Yeah, I
not.
don't know any of those
Yeah,
bands.
it is not for. It is post punk in the most post sense of the word. No Wave like heavily took influence from jazz and like free jazz and sort of took the amateur nature of punk and like the idea that like you don't need training, you don't need technique, you don't need like years of experience to be a musician, like you just have to go out there and do it, and took that and mixed it with the language of like free jazz and improvisation. And so you got this blending of just like distortion and noise and dissonance and attitude that just made this genre known as no wave as a kind of reaction to new wave, which was the kind of popularization of of like lighter punk bands like the Talking Heads, like Blondie, like in the UK you had bands like Tears for Fears or even the later Clash albums.
No wave sound is often a lot more dissonant, whereas
Mm-hmm.
like new wave is a lot of like fun, bouncy, crazy electronic sounds where no wave just like takes that and it's like, all right, here's a bunch of guitars like cranked up, tuned way down with some pedals like layered on top of it.
Yeah.
It's a total like kind of flipped response to what was happening in new wave, and it's definitely like Sonic Youth is not always like a comfortable listening experience, but I don't mean that in a bad way. It like perks your ears, and
Yeah.
it's not always like soothing. It like pulls you in and like kind of makes you uncomfortable in a comfortable way, if that makes any
Yeah.
sense.
Well, it's very like illustrative music, I feel like. They have a very like a very sort of cinematic approach and sound. They make like musical landscapes that really do feel like experiences a lot of the times more so than like songs per se. And that's
I,
not
w-
to
I
say
was
they don't
kind
have
of I was
super
kind
awesome
of
songs.
I was kind of thinking, I don't know if this sounds bad, but like they're kind of an indie rock jam band.
Yeah, no, like
They're
yeah.
they're they're like the indie rock Grateful Dead in
Yeah.
in a
It's
sense where
yeah, it's like the Grateful Dead on a bad acid trip, like a
yeah,
really bad acid trip.
exactly. They have all their album songs, but then you can find live versions as well that are like 20-minute versions of
Yeah.
just like noise solos and things like that.
Yeah. It's so cool to think about how they met each other and got to know each other because they were all so different, and especially the core three, like Thurston Moore, Kim Gordon, and Lee Ronaldo. Thurston was like this punky kid who like moved to New York City as soon as he could. I think I read he moved there in 77 and like just wanted to be like in the punk scene, like wanted to be like among all these crazy bands, like young kid, like probably too young to like move away from home, but just basically like a runaway. Kim Gordon was the daughter of, I believe, like a professor of art or art history, like super well educated, like super sharp, super politically active, like extremely intelligent. And Lee Ronaldo is like a classically trained like professional guitar player who was playing with Glenn Branca, who's like
Yeah, I think that's where him and
yeah,
Thurston met. Didn't weren't
yeah,
they both
yeah,
played there?
yeah, and it's just so weird to think that all these different things melded together into Sonic Youth. Like, not to sound like pretentious, but the three of them really did have like serious, significant, like artistic credentials and motivations behind their band. Like, and I think that is maybe what starts to set them apart from just being another like punk or post punk band is that they weren't just, and not that this is like a good or bad thing, but they weren't just another group of like people who had like no other option but to play music, but instead they like were extremely driven by both like a desire to make music and like a desire to make like art in a sense. And I think that their music like it has that sound and that weight. And I think if like any rock music could like be performed in an art gallery and like people with like suits and wine glasses would like find something to like write about in it, I think Sonic Youth is probably like the closest punk music gets to having that.
They got the name Sonic Youth by fusing together the nickname from a member of MC5. His, I guess, Fred Sonic was
Patti
his.
Smith's husband.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So yeah, they that's where they got the Sonic from, and then Big Youth is a reggae artist, and that's where they got the Youth from. Just smashed them together. Bam, Sonic Youth, and
And Bob's your uncle.
that's where it all began.
One thing
One
that
band, New York City,
one thing that
1981.
always strikes even the two of us that we always I feel like talk about whenever we mention Sonic Youth and anything is that it's weird us being kids of like the late 90s who like really like were born after grunge, like we missed out on that, like
Yeah,
we weren't alive for Nirvana or like Pearl Jam kind of like being at the height of their popularity.
for a lot of the music we love.
Yeah, yeah, and so like it's weird to us knowing that grunge music was like the thing that it was this kind of like last resurgent popularity of like rock music. um it's weird because Sonic Youth is so often lumped in with like 90s alternative grunge bands like it, and because there's such a large influence on them, that I feel like for the longest time in my life I didn't know, or like I really didn't know that Sonic Youth was so much older.
Oh yeah,
uh like I always thought that they were like just like another like early 90s band.
I know exactly what you mean. I thought the same thing, and then like you look at the dates and you're like, oh my gosh, like Daydream Nation is like 88, right?
Yeah, and that's like the middle of their discography. I mean,
Yeah,
their first release is 82.
I know. It's wild, and they really are the first grunge band. No, like no doubt, they are the first band to harness the grunge energy. I was thinking like bands. There's a few bands that like encapsulate this idea of what cool is, in my
Yeah.
opinion. I think Lou Reed, he's just like the king of cool. He
Yeah.
like invented cool. And Sonic Youth is just another band that I think kind of defined what cool is. I don't, I don't know how to describe it much
Yeah.
more beyond that, but they're just like a cool group of people. They're just like when you see them together as a band, like you're like, fuck, they're just cool. They like look cool playing music. They make cool music. There's no other way to describe them, but they are just like that like baseline of what cool is.
Bands that just strike the perfect balance between being completely confrontational and abrasive and having an attitude of like fuck what you say, like fuck you, like I don't care, I'm going to make music that I want to make, it's going to be loud, it's going to be energetic, it's going to be crazy and kind of dangerous, but also at the same time they're people who have like the forethought and who are thoughtful and smart enough to then like self-reflect and be able to talk in an eloquent way and in a way that's like interesting, like instead of just like I've always thought that like the Sex Pistols or the Ramones are kind of boring. Like as like the music is good, it's catchy, but I've always thought that like the shtick that like the characters that they play, they're boring. Like they are
Yeah.
cartoon characters, and they are very dumbed down in our like cultural memory. Where like I could watch for hours like interviews with Sonic Youth or the Velvet Underground or Joy Division, because like they are more like critical and both of their own music, but also just more critical of the world. And it's not just like we just wanted to play loud music, like la la la, like anarchy. Like it's more engaging, I think, to me.
They're being themselves
Yeah,
essentially in their music. They aren't just like, yeah, punk rock,
yeah,
ripped jeans, let's do it. I was
yeah.
kind
And
of
I think
thinking back to you kind of talking about, yeah, we didn't we through a lot of the bands we loved, we never like lived through them. We can only reflect upon them. I guess that's what this
yeah,
podcast is for us, a place to vent about all these thoughts we have on all these bands. When I was trying to think back to the first time I heard Sonic Youth and like how I discovered them, it's not like, yeah, I just saw this band did this random spot in New York. It was like, yeah, I saw this guy kill this song on Guitar Hero
yeah.
Expert
I
like
was gonna say
one
the exact
time.
same.
Like
You're like,
at my friend's house, like in someone's basement, like some guy was just playing Cool Thing and it blew my mind.
yeah. I it's so strange. I'm really thankful for how much music I have access to like all the time, and the fact that I can hear an amazing song on the radio or in a commercial or like in a movie or a TV show or like through Spotify or find it on the internet by some chance. But I also feel like there's a weird sense, there's that feeling of like kind of missing out on something. And it's not like a nostalgia for like I was born in the wrong decade, like but
Yeah.
like it's a weird sense that like it feels like the music and how we find it and how we connect with it somehow feels slightly less genuine than what we imagine it was like for people back then.
Oh,
And like
the grass is always greener.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. It feels like you always hear these stories about like, like, yeah, so I was like walking in like Greenwich Village, like back when it was like, no yuppies, like wasn't safe. And I just heard this like band playing in a basement and I like went and checked it out and it was like, yeah, that's how I met like Thurston for the first time. And it's like, yeah, like will we ever have those kind of stories about bands in the future, or will it kind of just be like, yeah, and then my Spotify recommend told me to check out this band from
Yeah.
Austin, and their first album was really good. So, so like, I don't know.
I'll never forget Guitar Hero 3 coming out, and I played the sickest show of my life. It's how I learned most of my favorite albums.
Yo, but for real, Guitar Hero 3, you're a fucking poser if you didn't play only the
Yo, yeah.
prison show. That was the background I chose. Prison show or die.
Guitar Hero 2 is where it was at, though. I feel like that one had
Get,
the a
get out
way
of
more
here.
hardcore soundtrack. Uh,
Get out of here. Guitar Hero 3 had Dead Kennedys, Sonic Youth. Yo, you could play Yellow by Coldplay on Guitar Hero 3.
whatever, dog.
Yeah.
When looking at Sonic Youth, I mean, there's so many albums. It's a large spread. I suppose looking at the timeline of them, they didn't really get super Sonic Youthy until 1985. Bad Moon Rising is when they really kind of got in the Sonic Youth sort of stride. But I just wanted to open up the floor a little bit, Dylan. What Sonic Youth albums are some faves of yours in this
Yeah.
spread from spanning from 82 to
Yeah.
2009?
Long spread. I definitely think that for as cool as I think their early stuff is, the more kind of new wave, the more kind of no wave albums of like their debut, the self-titled debut, and Confusion is Sex, which I guess is considered like their first real studio album. Even though the debut, it's listed as an EP, but it really is like as long as an album. Those albums are cool. They are less accessible, and like I find myself, it's not like an easy listen per se. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't really find myself really totally vibing, like wanting to listen to Sonic Youth until about Evil, and I really think Evil is such an amazing way to get into Sonic Youth because it's really a really cool balance point between what their early stuff was. It's definitely dissonant. It's definitely like a challenging listen at times, but it's got the building blocks of like what would become Daydream Nation, what would become those like really hooky, really almost poppier sounding songs. But it's still like a frightening album at times. I really do enjoy Evil a lot. Of course, like Daydream Nation is a masterpiece, but I feel like I almost don't need to talk about it as much. And instead, I want to jump like basically all the way to the end with my other pick. I really really love Rather Ripped and Sonic Nurse. I think both of those. I have Sonic Nurse on vinyl, and I remember buying it literally just on a whim. Like this was literally like Dylan only knowing Sonic Youth through Guitar Hero Dylan buying this Sonic Youth record, and it happened to be this one from 2004. And I remember not listening to it for like years, like literally never listening to it, never taking the record out, just because I like got home and I think I like looked it up, like what's the best Sonic Youth album, and like no list ever talked about Sonic Nurse because it was like a recentish album from their more accessible sound. But like listening to that and Rather Ripped, they are fantastic albums. The songs are cool. The guitar parts are like intricate and complex and like they sound amazing, but they're also like catchy songs with like melody and song structure, and like I find myself just like really really wanting to listen to Rena or Incinerate or Stones. Like they're just really crazy good songs. And I honestly think that with time and age, Sonic Youth didn't lose a sense of like, maybe they lost a bit of their jagged edges, but what they gained is that they really gained an intricate like sense of just like great songcraft. And I think that those two albums in particular in their later period are the ones I'm the most familiar with, but I really think those are like highly worth getting into, especially as an entry point. Maybe like they're maybe the best entry point into Sonic Youth for people who wouldn't necessarily be sure if they would like Sonic Youth or not.
So I listened to Rather Ripped after I saw you kind of mentioning it a lot, and it is nice, and it is like it totally is accessible like you're saying, but my issue with that is it after I had kind of listened to like was re-listening to like Dirty and Goo and Evil and albums like that, going to Rather Ripped, it just felt kind of boring, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
in comparison to those other albums. Not to say it's bad, and I do agree it did have some moments where I was like, oh, this is like pretty catchy and pretty nice and cool, but it just wasn't the Sonic Youth experience. I guess I wanted as much as I feel like um I think Goo and Dirty are probably like that, that 90s era of Sonic Youth is probably my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
Um and at re-listening to Dirty in particular, is one I hadn't listened to a bunch, but I was like, that's one I feel like I should dive into for this episode a little bit. And yeah, I maybe one of it like rose to be one of my favorite Sonic Youth albums for sure. And it's funny too. I for some reason I saw like a clip from 40-year-old virgin pop up on my like news feed, and Seth Rogen's character is wearing a Sonic Youth, like a Dirty Sonic Youth t-shirt. The
Of
album
course.
Dirty, it wasn't a Dirty t-shirt, but
Mm-hmm.
it was, I thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, I think Goo, like Daydream Nation, I feel like those are just both Sonic Youth albums that have
Yeah.
been spoken for so much. Even Dirty, I think is another super popular, one of their most popular albums. But Yeah, I think Evil. I see you start that one off as well. I think is one of their coolest albums, and really like the start of Sonic Youth. I think it is kind of like an evolution, but
Yeah. Oh, I see what you did there. Oh, I love, yeah, I really do love. There's like, I think maybe honestly one of my most favorite, just like Sonic Youth moments is how crystal clear star power is on that album on Evil, because most of the album is it's more kind of like that, like we were talking about, it's more like an experiential album. Like there's not a ton of like songs on the album. It's a lot of like passages and noisy bits and more sort of more of a kind of like wandering listen. But then Star Power, kind of like in the early middle part of the album, is just like a straight up like that song. If that song had come out in like 1992, like after Nevermind, that would have been a like smash hit. That song is so catchy and so good. It's such a good song, and I think it
Shadow of
gets
a
overlooked a lot.
Shadow of a Doubt right before that is
Mm,
also such a banger. Like any Kim Gordon song
yeah.
where she is just like in that Kim Gordon zone, like whispering in your ear, just oh, so like so cool, so alluring. Just Shadow of a Doubt is just one of those like those banging Kim Gordon songs.
Yeah, Madonna, Sean and Me at the end is also, that's a really cool like long kind of, it's mostly, I think it, believe it's all Thurston singing it, but it's a really cool like switch between like talking and singing song. And there's another song, I'm trying to remember which one it was that it was, but there's a song where Lee Ronaldo is just like ranting over it, and it's like mostly like dissonant noise and kind of like exciting sort of little like improvisational sounding bits, and Lee Ronaldo is just doing this like long sort of like tirade over it, and it reminded me a lot of like our talk about like Andrew Savage, like the tirade over like the music, and it just made me realize that there's so many different aspects of like the like of just indie rock in general, like all different types of indie rock, from post punk to noise rock to indie rock to everything in between, that Sonic Youth really did so much to lay down the fabric. Because before, I feel like the music was either like hardcore, like it was just like straight up hardcore, like Black Flag or Minor Threat, or it was post punk like Joy Division. It was kind of more spacious and groove oriented and dub influenced. And there was, and like that was, or it was like hard rock, and it was, you know, like metal or hard rock. Sonic Youth kind of came in and like weirdly fused itself into all these different nooks and crannies, but created something that sounds just like totally new. And I think that, you know, you wouldn't have Light Up Gold with like those songs that have like the dissonant feedback over them and like the weird sort of stutters and pauses. You wouldn't have like the OCs and the weird way in which they approach like
I mean,
punk but psychedelic.
you're even talking about bands like now, even with their albums, like we wouldn't have bands like Pavement, like Built to
Yeah.
Spill, like we wouldn't have any of the 90s happening without a band like Sonic Youth. Like I know they are just like we like we were saying, we thought of them as a 90s band originally, but that was because like they're just their sound is so ahead of their time that it just like you listen to it and you're it just does not feel like you're in the 80s when you listen to
Yeah.
Sonic Youth. You are definitely like way ahead of that, it seems like.
It's like simultaneously like super futuristic but also like primitive and like dystopian and apocalyptic. I guess is like that's it's cool to think about that though as like a reflection of its time though. Like the idea of, I guess we don't really think about it because we weren't even alive, and it just seems like it's like distant history to us. But I mean, people were like genuinely distraught that like Reagan was the president, and I mean, he literally was kind of like the Trump of his time. He wasn't a fucking idiot, I guess, but he was evil. And he was like an actor, you know, literally like an actor turned into a politician who just wanted to like give, you know, line the corporation's pockets and give the 1% like more and more of a slice of the pie. And I think that's where a lot of the anger of punk from that era, like from hardcore and from all these different branches, like the birth of indie rock, where their anger kind of came from. And it's really cool to hear Sonic Youth. Like I really do think of them as a political band, but they're kind of more than just pure politics. Like it's kind of a soundscape for a collapse, but also kind of like a something beyond the collapse. Like it's not purely negative. It's not purely just like the end of the world. It's kind of like chaos and like society falling apart, but there's always this sort of sense of like kind of hopefulness or like joy like hidden deep in like the anger and the distortion that I think is what makes Sonic Youth more refreshing to me than like a lot of hardcore or things that just seem mostly like angry and frustrated with the world.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more intent with the sound, though it is like chaotic and crazy and noisy. It's clearly composed. It's not
Mm-hmm.
just like a train wreck. It is built to be what it is, and it is so different from kind of like the noise of punk that was happening around. It's interesting. I think I read somewhere I think they saw like they saw Minor Threat together, and Thurston was just like blown away by them. He was like, that was the greatest band like ever, and I think that like yeah, like you were saying, just like seeing bands like that really played into them building their sound. Like when they started playing in '81, but uh, didn't really get their stride until like 4 or 5 years later, and I
Yeah.
think that just came from touring with these bands and seeing other bands live and kind of taking everything from the time period they were in, not and while also drawing from like a lot of punk inspiration, um, but also just drawing from like the current inspiration of the time. And I think that's what made them such a strong band too. Is they adapted to kind of the era that they were in. Like you
Yeah.
can hear that with their albums as they evolve. Like Goo and Dirty are totally 90s albums, where I think Rather Ripped is a much more like it is a 2006 rock album. And
Yeah.
it's as and when you go back to those earlier kind of like the Sonic Youth EP, it is just like a garage band like
Yeah.
making
I
some noise.
I was listening to I was listening to Snail Mail's first like EP the other day, and I was thinking like I never really thought of it before, but I was like this the tone of the guitar and like the kind of like slight sense that it's like maybe an open tuning or maybe even just like a drop D tuning or something like that. That that sound reminded me of like later Sonic Youth albums because the guitar tones get like a little bit cleaner, and they're not as distorted and noisy, but they still have that sound of like the strange tunings, and you can hear kind of like the full strums. And I was just thinking like all of the different sort of just the influence of that in and of itself, like the approach to tunings, I think makes guitars like sound so different because they we're so used to hearing like chords played in a particular like fingering with a particular intonation, and just to like invert that in some way by changing up that tuning, it really does make the guitar sound different, even if it's subtle, and even if it's like if someone doesn't necessarily know exactly why it sounds different or how it does make a difference. And I was thinking, I don't remember where I read it, but it was about Pavement, and they were talking about how they picked up on that and they started doing a lot more like, or at least they picked up on that like in the beginning, and they did a lot like at first they I guess they were writing a lot of their songs in standard tunings, but they started when they started recording I think they were talking about Wowie Zowie. They started to do a lot more like drop D tunings and like open tunings, and some of the songs, like I think of like Grounded, um or some of like just the chunkier sounding guitars on like Rattle by the Rush or something like that. It does have a strangely different like tonality to the guitar, that you don't really pick up on unless you start to think like, why does this sound slightly different than like what a standard like power chord or D chord or G chord sounds like with, like standard tuning. And Sonic Youth really just took it to like the extreme. But I mean, it's cool how influential that was to all sorts of genres.
Yeah, they're still kind of making music today too, not as Sonic Youth, all
Mm.
separate. I don't know as much about Lee Ronaldo. I don't know if he has a solo
He
career.
does. He
He
does. It's
does?
actually, I think I've listened to Lee Ronaldo's stuff maybe the most.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
Not a lot,
Thurston, I
but
think Thurston Moore has a pretty lame solo career. I don't know. It's just kind of like dull and boring music from what I've heard. But Kim Gordon has had a pretty awesome solo career. She's the one who I've listened to the most, and her most recent album is really cool.
she was in
It's really
oh,
really wild stuff.
she was in this little short-lived band called Free Kitten. Um, and I haven't listened to a ton of it, but they have 3 albums. And they have one from 1997. So I guess like she was in it while she was in Sonic Youth. But there's this one song called Never Gonna Sleep on that album that is so cool. And it's literally just like Kim Gordon, her bass, and drums. And it's just like the coolest bass line. It's so hard to describe, but it's just like so kind of like deep and thumping, and it's like so hypnotic. It's such a cool song. I highly recommend anybody check out "Never Gonna Sleep" by Free Kittens if you want like a cool entry point into like unsonic youth Sonic Youth members.
Hmm.
Her song "Murdered Out" is really good too. I don't know if that was on her newest album though, or if that was like a single. Yeah, okay, so it is on her new album. Yeah, Murdered Out is a sick song.
Yeah. Let's take a quick break here and let people know what other fun stuff we got going on before we continue the old Sonic Youth conversation.
Let's do it.
Strange Campaign. The Strange Campaign is our Dungeons and Dragons brother, sister, sibling podcast that we got going on, where Dylan has created a whole crazy world for me and a few of our other pals to explore in. And you can find it almost on most of the places that you listen to podcasts.
Yeah. Even some ones that I don't think I've ever heard of before, but I guess that's the way the internet works. We're not on Tidal, unfortunately.
No, sorry.
We're still working with Beyonce getting those details finalized.
is
Um
Yeah, we're working on getting the lossless podcast quality. That's really the hardest part. And if you want to keep up with everything that we got going on, you can follow our Instagram.
strange.convo.pod.
Definitely follow us there because the next bracket is going to be starting up soon, which we're really excited about.
Yeah,
And
it's gonna be a good one. I'm really excited to see how this one goes.
oh yeah,
The last bracket had a lot of not upsets but surprises. Like
yeah.
yeah, just like looking back, I guess I'm more excited to see how my expectations are met or like not met than I am necessarily excited to see who wins per se.
Oh yeah, and we'll definitely have plenty of bracket talk coming up. So keep up with all the Strange Conversations episodes. Check out our website too, and you know all the fun, all the craziness and the wild, wacky adventures we're always going on.
The wild, wild west of podcasts. I was actually wondering, one of the things I was thinking about, because I've been in a I was in a bit of a playlist making rut for a while, but I think I'm kind of back into the swing of like wanting to make meaty playlists, and I was wondering, is it an art or is it a science?
Hmm, interesting. Um, I feel like it's got to be an art because I think it can go. I feel like it can go both ways in the sense where it can be like an art for yourself where it's like, you just you know what you like and you kind of make a playlist, and if other people like it, then so be it. But then I guess you can go in it in a formulaic sense where you're like, all right, this playlist I'm about to craft is gonna be the playlist, like top to bottom, no matter who listens to it's gonna enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
There's multiple approaches where it can be much more of just like the playful like spread, or it can be like the methodical thought out kind of playlist. So
Yeah, I find myself bouncing between the extremes a lot. Do you mainly go for like, do you mainly go for a sort of defined category type playlist, or do you more
yeah,
go for like
so
an emotion or like a vibe?
there's honestly like two types of playlists that I do, or that I've recently done. It's been a while since I've like tried to do a genre playlist or a themed playlist so much, I guess, where I usually just do like a big playlist for like a period of my life. It worked kind of for college semesters, I guess, is where it started. Is like every semester I would just have like my master playlist that I would just like, oh, I like this song, it goes in the playlist. I do those playlists, and then I do like my best of playlists where it's just the bands I really like. I just take all the songs I like from them and compile them into a master playlist. So
Mm.
those are really the two things I do, because I'm either listening to like one band exclusively or like exploring and trying to find a another band. So that's, I guess, how I navigate it, is just like the exploratory phase playlist, and then like the phase playlist, if
Yeah,
you will.
I think I've noticed that like I guess my initial like motivation for making a lot of playlists usually winds up being some sort of thing related to like a mood or like some sort of situational idea where I want some kind of thing to listen to in this situation or during like this season or like for this like emotion or vibe or like setting. And I think that those playlists though, as I make them, they start to shape around certain artists and genres too. Like I started this playlist for like the summer. I used to be really good about creating summer playlists. I had two like absolutely fantastic summer playlists, two summers in college that I constantly listened to them through the summer, and I was constantly adding things as I like heard new songs in the summer, and then there were playlists that I even just like kept listening to. Perhaps even so good that I like didn't need to make another playlist like the summer after that, because as I added them together, it was just like one huge like 500 song or something like that playlist. But I finally got around to it again, and I found that like I was like, oh, like this is gonna be like, the summer mix. Like I called it like revolutionary summer because that it very much feels like that is like, that's the air of this summer.
Mm.
It's either that or like sad indoor summer, and I didn't want to make that playlist. But then I
that was
like
that was the
realized,
spring. It was a
yeah,
sad
exactly,
indoor spring.
sad boy spring. But I realized like as I was making this playlist, I've been listening to a lot of at work. I've been listening to a lot of like we have Pandora. Like I feel like I've mentioned this so many times. I feel like
Yeah,
people
once an
probably know.
episode
I
maybe.
know. But so I've been listening to a ton of Fela Kuti radio, who's like an Afrobeat, like one of the founding kind of artists of Afrobeat, which is sort of like a mix of funk and jazz and like African traditional music, general sort of like Black Power and like liberationist politics. And so that has recommended like a ton of like African music that I really had never listened to before. And through that artist, I just started to like go for like a similar vibe. And so now I've got this playlist that's like a big conglomeration of kind of like most, I would say it's all old music. Like it's all sort of like 80s or earlier, but it's all like a mix of like African artists and like American blues and funk and like kind of like jazz, like few like a lot of just like there's some reggae. Like mainly it's kind of like my Revolutionary Summer playlist has kind of formed itself into like a Black liberation like music playlist, and it slaps. It absolutely slaps. And then I started working on a
Promoting your own playlist.
no, I got the hustle is real. I don't get any. I don't understand people who get like followers on Spotify. I guess you must. It just must be like your job to make playlists at this
It must
point.
translate to other social media followers or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. I think playlists. It's healthy and helpful to like start with a short list of like small rules to follow. Like I found a playlist that I probably the last playlist before this one that I made that I was really proud of that I still listen to quite a lot was like another situational playlist. But it's kind of like a funny motivation. Like it first started out where I was playing a lot of the skate games, and it was like when
Mhm.
I was first like going back to like teach myself how to skateboard, and I was like in love with those playlists from those games, the soundtracks. And I was like, what if they made Skate 4? Like, what would the soundtrack to that game be? And so I compiled a lot of my favorite songs from the three Skate games, and then I added more songs. But I was trying to follow like the idea that like no more than one song per artist. Like you can't have just like I can't just put like a ton of OCs or something like that. The soundtracks are always like very broad in genre, and like they cover a wide spectrum of like punk, hip hop, funk, like all this like old and new and obscure and well-known stuff. And so it was a really fun playlist to put together because I had to think about like how the music would translate to like making me want to be on my skateboard or like making me want to just like there goes the fire
Mhm.
truck. And so yeah, it was a fun playlist to make, and it's a real fun playlist to listen to, and it's definitely fun to like put the old earbuds in and cruise around and listen to it because it's got some absolute bangers on there.
I feel like playlists are the closest thing that we have to making mixtapes in our day and age.
Yeah.
You can't like burn anyone a CD or like make a mixtape. You can just like make someone a playlist. Hope that they use Spotify, I guess, or that
Yeah.
you're on the same streaming platform because that would be awkward if you're like, "Hey, can I make you a title playlist?"
Yeah. I would love if someone sent me a burned CD.
Yeah, that'd be
I
sick.
my aux cord broke in my car, so I am just reliant on the CDs I have.
Hey,
Someone sent me
want to know what we should do
mixtape.
for our Patreon? We should have like one of the levels be we'll make mixed CDs for
I'm down
people.
for it.
Yeah.
It's like $4 to get like 100 CDs.
Yeah. And if you even have a CD player and
Yeah,
want a
exactly.
CD,
If you
that's
have
the
an
other.
actual way to burn them.
I have a CD player in my car, so I got a whole mass collection of CDs always ready to go. Sometimes it's nice when the service is bad or I'm just not feeling searching through Spotify and it's like, oh yeah, I just got like a great set of CDs in here to flip through. So I know Sonic Youth didn't make it through bracket numero uno, but we do have bracket numero dos coming up, and I was thinking maybe we could take a minute just at the kind of preliminary prediction tables. Nothing
Hmm.
we don't really have the bracket fully built yet, but we could just take a look at the list and I don't know, just I wanted to bounce some ideas around, see what we're thinking for the front runners, our our raw ideas, I guess, just the the general thoughts on what's going to happen with bracket number two. We are focusing on the years 67 through 67. I think by the time we release this
You just said
episode,
67 through 67.
I'm really not talking too hot tonight. 67 through 77 um, is going to be the decade that we're looking at. We hopefully, maybe by the time this episode goes up, we will have posted the bracket. Not 100% certain about that, but
Yeah,
we'll
I think we could have that up. I
we
think
can
I think we don't need to necessarily be too secretive
no.
of the
I,
bracket info.
I don't think so at all. I don't think so at all. But yeah, so I'll do a quick read through of all the bands we got on here. So get ready. It's 32, and well, I'll bang through these. Here we go. Velvet Underground, Nick Cave, Talking Heads, Roxy Music, Iggy and the Stooges, Television, Patti Smith, Richard Hell, The Slits, MC5, Wire, Death, Gang of Four, Devo, The Fall, Love, The Raincoats, T-Rex, Suicide, Blondie, New York Dolls, Frank Zappa and the Mother of Invention, The Modern Lovers, Brian Eno, 13th Floor Elevators, Captain Beefheart, Can, Kraftwerk, The Cramps, Bauhaus, X-Ray Specs, and finally, Public Image Ltd. Limited, whatever you want to say. I don't know.
Tomato,
I was
tomato.
I was kind of sliding into a Smash Bros. Announcer
I
midway
know,
there.
yeah.
That's kind of what I was feeling. And also, if anyone wants to, you can sample those. Maybe use them as text tone, or if you just ever need an audio bit of me saying any of those band names, it's in the public domain.
Free of charge. Yeah, I think I see, like, I think the problem is I prescribe too much value to bands that I just think are like should do well because I consider them very influential, and I really just have to think more about, like, I don't want to make it sound like people don't know a lot of these bands, but I do think I just have to prescribe more value to name recognition over, like, you know, history book like influence and like who my favorite artists say their favorite artists are.
Hmm. Something I was just thinking about, and I'm curious as to what would happen for you if it came down, or at some point you may potentially have to make the decision between the Velvet Underground and Talking Heads, and I'm curious as to where you lean in that.
I give priority to I really do give priority to, I think, like, you know, there's a certain value in getting to home plate first, crossing the finish line first, and I really think that the fact of the matter is that the Velvet Underground, without the Velvet Underground, there literally would not be any of these artists. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there wouldn't be any of these artists. There wouldn't be any of the artists on the last bracket. There wouldn't be any of the artists in any of the playlists that we've put together. I understand that to some people, the music of the Talking Heads is not as exciting. It's not as fun. It's not as catchy as, or the music of the Velvet Underground is not as fun or as exciting or as catchy as Talking Heads or any of these other artists. But like at the end of the day, I think my vote is going to go to artists who I really do believe have made like an indelible impact on the music I love and on just the music of the world. Like an artist I personally think should go so far, but I am prepared to see them lose in the first round. I think Can should just like I could literally see in my brain, my bracket brain, Can would be a Final Four band. Like they they are an influence on Sonic Youth, a huge influence on Sonic Youth. They're a huge influence on the OCs. They fused like hippie jam band style rock with jazz, with classical, with electronic, with psychedelic, with krautrock, and I mean they're massively influential and an absolutely insane band to listen to. Like their albums are total experiences, but I'm totally prepared to see them go in the first round. It'll break my heart a little bit, but I think it'll happen.
I know it is cliche, but I really do think the Velvet Underground is probably my front runner for this bracket. I think they could go all the way. I don't know. I could be upset in the end by what truly by what events transpire. But I do think they deserve the crown. Also, looking at the list, I I think Iggy and the Stooges as well is another one. Though one of the more popular bands, I think sometimes I think popularity happens for a reason for some bands. Um, and Iggy and the Velvet Undergrounds are two bands that are popular just because they're so gosh darn good and influential, and I think that they're some front running bands for myself. And another band like Can for you, the Modern Lovers is a band I would like to see go far, but I don't think they will make it past round one.
Yeah.
I don't know who they'll go up against, but I can't unless it's Can. I don't know. I don't know what'll happen with the Modern Lovers, but I do love me some Johnny Ritchie, my New England
Yeah.
boy. Singing
Who do
songs
you
about Maine.
who do you
He
think
lived in Maine for a while too.
who do you think is the biggest potential sleeper hit?
What do you mean?
Like who do you think will be like the B-52s of this bracket? Like who do you think maybe we're not
I think
really paying much attention
I
to,
think
but will
Blondie. I think Blondie's gonna go really far.
hmm.
Maybe I don't know. It's always hard to tell. I have no idea how our followers will end up voting in the end, but I mean, we I guess we pulled the stats off Spotify at the monthly listeners, and Blondie is the most listened to monthly, right, out of all these bands.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
She
guess
is.
go
She's the
going off
queen.
going off that prediction, Blondie would be the the most potential to win because she's technically the most popular band. If we're going by those numbers, but if our fan base is more like our taste in music, I would see a band like I would see it coming down to like Velvet Underground v Iggy, Velvet Underground v Talking Heads. Um, do you think who do you think is an underdog band? Who do you think is a band like for
Hmm.
me last time? I think My Bloody Valentine. I guess I did not really expect them to go as far as they did.
Yeah. Hmm.
Who do you think this time would have that same kind of?
I think it could. I could see a strong turnout from either Nick Cave or Roxy Music. I
Mm,
think they have the perfect amount of like a surprisable, like more surprise, like larger than I expected. Surprising number of monthly listeners. Roughly, both are around 2.5 million monthly listeners. I think maybe Nick Cave might be a little bit more might have a little bit more name recognition than Roxy Music, but I think that there's a good chance that Roxy Music or Nick Cave could very easily dethrone, very easily knock out like Frank Zappa, New York Dolls. Oh, and I think Kraftwerk is probably gonna have a pretty strong showing. I think Kraftwerk is a band that a lot of people know the name of, but maybe not necessarily a lot of people have listened to. And I think a lot of people might just vote purely based off of like if it comes down to like, the raincoats or Kraftwerk. I think some people would be like, I just recognize the name Kraftwerk more. I
yeah.
know that they're like, robot music for sad Europeans.
I really could see T Rex also
Mm.
going pretty far as well. Another
Oh,
artist that a lot of listens and a lot of name recognition, especially with songs just like "Bang a Gong." I feel like being in a lot of movies and stuff.
Yeah.
It's that recognition that going up even against someone like Richard Hell, who we may like expect to win more, where someone people will just be like, oh yeah, I know this T-Rex song, but I haven't heard maybe Richard Hell or Gang of Four before.
Yeah. I I really want to see the Fall do well, but I don't think they will. I feel like people don't give the Fall the credit they're due. Like they freaking were started the exact same time as like Joy Division, if not a little bit earlier. They're from Manchester. They lasted longer. Marquis Smith is freaking weird as hell. It's like if you mixed Joy Division with the Talking Heads. Like it's like David Byrne mixed with Ian Curtis, mixed with like weird, jangly, like angular guitars. I freaking love The Fall. They're a band that I've really gotten into in the past few years. Actually,
I
through Proto Martyr, a lot of people I guess have said that like Proto Martyr is very heavily influenced by The Fall, and so I went back and I've been like listening to more The Fall.
I was thinking that Sonic Youth, the band that we were talking about this episode, is in a weird way a response to the fall, like an
Hmm.
early, like an American response to like the fall sound. Because I think at the time there wasn't a lot like Sonic Youth, and
Hmm.
I feel like the fall is the only other band I can think of that has that same kind of weird energy. Um, that Sonic Youth kind of captures. Marquis Smith being another one of those people who I think is just kind of like cool.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
isn't he kind of a bad dude?
Probably,
I think.
honestly. I think it's just safe to assume that all British men,
Yeah,
all men in general, are probably just bad dudes at the end of the day.
I
He's
mean
dead, so
Thurston
I don't know.
Moore's a bad dude.
There's this Sonic Youth like Facebook group that I'm in that's honestly, I regret joining music pages on Facebook.
Yeah, I
The
know.
OC's one is great, the Thai one is great, but most of them are trash. Like, oh my god, they're the worst. But the Sonic
Yeah.
Youth one, they asked like a couple questions before you could get in. So at first I was like, oh, maybe this won't be so bad. Like this, like maybe it'll actually be people who like do some deep digging and like pull out cool live shows and stuff like that. And one of the questions was who is the most influent or like who's the most important member of Sonic Youth? And I thought it was like kind of a test. So I was like, I literally put as the answer, I was like Kim Gordon and Thurston Moore's marriage because ultimately, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's when they got married. That's when I think right around when Evil came out, or Bad Moon Rising, and then the divorce was the end. Well, also just because Thurston Moore is kind of a piece of shit, and they they couldn't really be around each other anymore. But alas, that is the way that it goes for bands sometimes.
Yeah. Bass player of Pavement played
Yeah, Mark
bass.
Ibold. He
Yeah.
he was
On
on a.
the last album, the Eternal on
I think he's
Matador.
I think he's on a couple other ones too. Honestly, I think he played with them for a bit, or was it just
He's
on the
on Rather
last one?
Ripped.
Maybe, I don't know. I feel like played with them a good amount. But yeah, it's cool. They're all pals. I know Kim Gordon and Stephen Malcolmus are pretty tight.
Yeah, it's crazy to read about like they'd tour together. It's just so weird to think like I was reading a little bit about like Sonic Youth's early days and like they went on this like 83 tour with Swans and apparently they like linked up with a lot of other bands for like single dates along the way and like there was one show that they showed that was billed. It was like Sonic Youth, Swans, Butthole Surfers and Big Black. And I was like what the fuck? Like how is
Yeah.
that like a lineup that like people got to go see?
So that was like their first that was their first London tour, right?
I think so.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that ended, I guess, or there's just one show on it that ended with Thurston just kind of like going into a rage because their equipment wasn't working, and they thought they just had a terrible show. He like destroyed his equipment like on stage and stuff like that. And I get it was like really well received. Like NME gave him like a really great review and stuff like that after the show, and they're just like, oh, they thought they were like having equipment trouble and like a rage quit of a concert, but it's punk rock as shit, bro.
Yeah, the Brits are like, oh, I like these American blokes.
Oh yeah, we got to find like a better way to wrap up the classics episode because it's not like will you listen again is not a question that really makes sense because it's a
I'll give you a good one, I
all right,
think.
yeah.
I want to see. I think I want you to name three bands, maybe possibly that we haven't mentioned yet, that you think either are like clearly influenced by Sonic Youth or are like an interesting way to loop back into Sonic Youth. Like have to be
Okay.
they can be before, actually. I'll say before or after. Either an interesting way to funnel into Sonic Youth or a band that is like clearly influenced and maybe you can work backwards to Sonic Youth.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Let's see here. Do you have any in mind to start us off?
Yeah, it was the one that I was thinking today actually doing the staff picks. I was listening to today's staff pick. The music was a girl band who are an Irish post-punk band. And just like listening to they're really like almost more of a noise rock band than post-punk, but like it's a healthy mix of the two. But just like listening to their sound and the way that they just like blow out their guitars and their bass, and it's just like these crazy walls of sound. I was really like listening to that and then going back and listening to Sonic Youth. Like the connection was like crystal clear, and even the way that the singer like kind of delivers lines in this sort of sing-song sort of like speech talk kind of way where there's like a cadence and a rhythm to his speech, but it's also like more almost of like a emotional talk than it is necessarily singing. Reminded me a bit of like Kim Gordon and the way that she sings. Um, and I was like, yeah, like I never really made this connection before, but I do definitely get like a strong influence from Sonic Youth to girl band, and it was cool to kind of pick up on that with like a sort of back and forth listening, going back on the two today.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Um, man, I'm still trying to think. I one band I was kind of thinking about. I think is maybe a little more out there. Mainly the first album, but LCD Sound System. I feel like that first self not self titled. Daft Punk is playing at my house.
Mm.
Um, I don't know. It's got that kind of weird experiment with sound. I think that Sonic Youth really paved the way for is just using instruments in the way that they're not supposed to be in a sense,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you're kind of making it how they're supposed to be.
Yeah. I I can that's cool. Like I guess one of the things that I don't think about as much when I think about Sonic Youth, because when I think about them, I try to think of the like the guitar playing. I think is the first thing that always comes to my mind. Like as a guitar player and as someone who like has a little bit of familiarity with like I understand they're using alternative tunings. I don't necessarily know what those tunings might be, but I understand that it's like a different approach to their like the guitar than like I can even like think about with like like not understanding where their fingers might be or like what they're doing to make those noises, but I still kind of understand like the general kinetic feeling of like this is a guitar and like they're playing the guitar, they're plucking strings or they're strumming the patterns. But one of the things I don't really think too much about when I think about Sonic Youth is like the studio work of the albums. Because
Mm-hmm.
while I know that they like must rehearse and constantly practice these songs, there's so much dubbing and like adding in bits and sounds and samples and like tape stuff and effects in the studio that I think really helps add to those albums as like those experiences, as those packages that I think that ethos is like super influential on indie rock because I think the punk ethos towards like albums was literally just like get in the studio, record everything live, cut it, done, album over, like no dubs, no added stuff, cheap, done, get the album out, put it on cassette, like done with it. Whereas like I think Sonic Youth was much more of like a studio band as well as a
Mm-hmm.
live band.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another band I'm thinking of that definitely very Sonic Youth esque is Empath, Philadelphia
Mm,
based like noise
yeah.
punk rock band. I think like lyrically very reminiscent of kind of like the Kim Gordon verses and style of singing, and just like sonically too. It's just kind of like that jangly noise that all kind of comes together in like a really like beautiful like composition of noise.
Yeah, I totally see that. Oh, they have a one song that I believe it's either the eye or it's no attachments. It might be no attachments, but it's got this like this just buzzing like sound to like I don't even know what it is. It feel maybe it's like a synthesizer or something, but like the song has this like really cool buzzing to it that acts like a note sort of, but it also kind of just acts like a texture that's like in the song, and it's such a cool sound. And I totally pick up on that. It kind of reminds me of another artist that I was thinking about that is a like me listening to them, I start to really love them almost as much, if sometimes not even more. But so preoccupations, before they were preoccupations, they a few of the members, including the lead singer, who's also the bass player, and the drummer, the lead singer and the bass player, the lead singer is the bass player, and the drummer of Preoccupations were in a band called Women, that was much more of like a noise rock sort of like avant pop like experimental indie band. They had two albums and then they broke up, and then unfortunately one of the members post breakup died in a car crash.
Oh
um,
yeah, I heard
and
about that.
so yeah, like that was really sad. And then they eventually the singer and the drummer formed Preoccupations with two other musicians. But the Two Women album and the self-titled debut for Preoccupations, those three albums heavily remind me of Sonic Youth. Like the strange textures of the guitar, like the really like jangly, really screechy guitar sounds, and then especially on the Women albums, the dense, like multi-layered guitar parts where they have two guitars playing like two different things at the same time that kind of sometimes interlock and then sometimes like overlap and are dissonant and like don't work together, but then they like fall back together, and it's like this weird puzzle effect that I think like Sonic Youth really influenced that approach with like guitars that are constantly like interlocking and then breaking apart and then like interlocking and then breaking apart. And it's a cool textural kind of rhythmic thing.
My third and final band that I think does a similar sort of guitar tone, um, that screechy kind of when they just kind of like scramble their hands all around and like just get like that like that crazy just like noise scape. But also a British band, interestingly enough, but I think Black Midi definitely has
Mm-hmm.
a lot of Sonic Youth in that album of theirs, Schlagenheim, or
Yeah.
of Schlagenheim. Super cool like noise rock album that instrumentally I think is very reminiscent of Sonic Youth.
Yeah. Yeah. That what was I listening to the other day? One of the songs is on a CD I have in my car. Western. That song is really cool. It's got like the banjos in it at the end.
Yeah.
They just like the instruments that they like put into that album sometimes like absolutely like sent me for a trip. I was like, is there really banjos in this album right now? Like, yeah, that album is so weird and so cool. Uh, I guess like the last one that I was gonna pick is kind of, I think of all the artists we've talked about, the least in our wheelhouse. And it relates to our bracket in a little bit, but I also think it might possibly be an artist that maybe more people are more familiar with, and maybe not always in the like in the necessarily like they've like listened to them as an artist, but the band that I was thinking, Explosions in the Sky, who are a quote unquote like post rock band, which is essentially like rock music without a singer, kind of. But most people would probably know them as the band who did the soundtrack to Friday Night Lights. They did the soundtrack. Yeah, they did the soundtrack to Lone Survivor, like that war movie, and they
Hmm.
basically like do the soundtrack to like every inspirational like sports video montage like ever. Um, but they're basically like they're heavily indebted to a lineage of like post-rock bands that kind of started with like Slint, who was a band that was on our bracket. But even Slint was like so heavily influenced by Sonic Youth, and I think just the idea of like dissonant, cinematic, technical, and complex arrangements. Like all those things are at home in a Sonic Youth song, and those all kind of got carried forward by the post rock bands like Slint, like uh like Godspeed You Black Emperor, like Explosions in the Sky, This Will Destroy You, Mogwai, all these different noise rock bands or not, or post punk bands that have this really cinematic sound and this very like instrumentation heavy like sort of textural experiential heavy sound. I think that they're all like super indebted to Sonic Youth.
Yeah, for sure. For sure, for sure, for sure. I think that's about our episode time here on Strange Conversations. Classics numero trace. Wow, wow, wow.
In the books. 15.
And with this too, we are also officially beginning the next bracket um, for to decide what the next episode, the next classics will be. But in the meantime, we will continue to release the Strange Conversations content as always. Do we know what next week's album is gonna be yet? I don't know if we
Oh yeah, I guess we
have
haven't
picked that.
really. Yeah,
We got a lot of
we'll have to look
options.
at the releases. We
Yeah,
do.
there's been a lot of great stuff coming out, so I'm sure we'll find something fun for y'all. But yeah, thanks to everybody for listening. And get ready for bracket number 2.
I don't know
And
what that was, but that was something dramatic.
and I'm trying to think of like a quippy Sonic Youth thing to say. But I'm too lost in Daydream Nation. Well, there it is. That's the best I'm gonna do.
I think we should just goo out of here. Goo
Oh,
away.
you're so dirty.